This is session 5, where we'll be taking a look at the topic lighting and climate, particularly the positive effects of LED lighting. Joining our moderator Azal Francis will be Ana Maria Carreño, the Senior Manager of CLASP and Deputy Director of the Clean Lighting Coalition, and Ryan Cobb, Energy Director at Belize's Ministry of Public Service, Energy and Public Utilities. We're happy to have you with us. Let's illuminate.
Welcome to Illuminate, Lighting and Climate. My name is Azal Francis, and I'm joined today by Ana Maria Carreño, Senior Manager of CLASP and Deputy Director of the Clean Lighting Coalition. I'm also joined by Ryan Cobb, Energy Director at Belize's Ministry of Public Service, Energy and Public Utilities, for a 15-minute quick-fire discussion on the intersections of lighting and climate. This conversation will explore how the transition to LED lighting will support climate resiliency and bring considerable benefits to people and planet. Welcome, Ana Maria, and Ryan.
Thank you, Sel. Thank you for having us in this event. Let's illuminate. It's a very inspiring beginning.
Let's illuminate. So jumping right in, especially considering that we're just coming off COP26 and knowing that LED lighting uses about half as much electricity as mercury-containing fluorescence, which translates to these massive reductions in global CO2 emissions. Why does lighting matter in global discussions about climate change? And we can start with you, Ana.
Thank you, Asel. I agree with you. We are just coming out of the COP that took place in Glasgow, and there was a general consensus and recognition that we need to do more if we want to avert the catastrophic effects of climate change, and that governments need to go back home and identify opportunities to bring more savings and to increase the level of ambition in their current NDCs. And this is, as you mentioned, where lighting has a major role to play. Accelerating a transition to clean and efficient lighting can bring immediate greenhouse gas emission savings and can do it cost effectively. We know that LEDs, as you mentioned as well, is a more efficient technology. And that means that, of course, by transitioning the lighting around us to LEDs, we can immediately reduce energy demand, which in turn means less emissions from the power plants that are powering those lights. And in the context of the COP as well, a lot of discussion was around finding opportunities, finding technologies that are going to be cost effective, where the funding is going to come from major investments requiring it in a transition to clean technology. And this is where lighting is also a major opportunity because we have a technology that is already here on the markets. It's widely available, it's accessible. The costs of LED lightings have decreased significantly in the past years. So LEDs are more, the price is compatible with other alternatives like fluorescence. Sometimes they have better prices as well. In cases where LEDs are most costly, you can recover very quickly that investment in a few months by savings in your electricity bill as well. So this is a unique opportunity to transition to a clean energy technology that is cost effective and that is going to bring significant greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And I wanted to put a little bit more in context in terms of what those savings can be. We have estimated that transitioning to clean and efficient lighting by 2025 can bring 3.5 gigatons of carbon emission savings. That is a significant opportunity, especially again, considering that this is a cost-effective technology as well. And that is equivalent to, for instance, removing all the cars from our roads over a year. So I think that gives you a little bit of the idea of what the opportunity is on this transition to clean lighting.
Yes, certainly that sets it all in perspective. Equivalent to removing all the cars in a year. Wow. Ryan, do you have anything to add to this question or conversation?
Yes. Moving or transitioning to LED lighting has much more benefits than just the energy savings, saying swap out of one for one. As you rightly said, swapping out fluorescence to LEDs, you immediately have somewhere around the vicinity of 50% savings. But LED technology allows you to go even further in savings. Because of the efficiency of the conversion of electricity to lighting, you also now have less heating within a particular room. So because there are now less heat sources within a room, your room conditioning energy consumption goes down as well. So you'll see a reduction in consumption from air conditioning. It also allows you for greater control of your lighting conditions because with LEDs, you'll be able to dim your lighting. So you can adapt to how bright a room is or how much natural light you can be using. So these are additional benefits that we see from the use of LED technology.
Certainly, especially given that in the region we're seeing an uptake in the use of air conditioned units. So having that indirect benefit of cooling with LEDs would be amazing. Thinking about situating this conversation into the theme of CARICOM Energy Month 2021. Our Energy Month theme is From Dependence to Resilience, Fueling Our Recovery with Sustainable Energy. Can you share a bit about the connection between lighting and sustainable slash resilient energy systems, please? And I guess we can start with you, Ryan.
Okay, thank you. Um, yes, specifically when we're talking about transitioning, um, when we're talking about LED lighting now allows us to bring lighting to communities that currently didn't have lighting. For example, it's much more feasible now to do solar lighting kits. Previously, you needed to have large batteries in order to provide lighting during the nighttime hours in these communities that don't have access to the national grid. But with the advent of LED lighting and the low voltage and low amperage that this technology requires, you can now more readily bring lighting to communities. And this really transitions because you no longer have to use, let's say, biomass to provide lighting within your households, reduces health costs as well, and improves education. So these are all aspects that goes within the transition that we're seeing right now within the Caribbean community as well.
Thank you so much for that, Ryan. Anna, any thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to add, I absolutely agree with Ryan that clean and efficient lighting offers an opportunity to improve energy access. And definitely we are seeing that happening in Africa and, of course, in many communities around the world. And as Ryan mentioned, in communities in places that don't have access to the grid. I also wanted to mention, but put it in the contestability as well. LED lighting lasts longer, sometimes lasts 2 to 3 times longer. And it's important to consider that because we're talking about a technology that at the end of the day is going to reduce waste. When you don't have to replace your lamps as frequently, when you don't have to replace your lamps as often, that means that waste generation be reduced. And especially in a transition to LED, we're not talking only about waste generation, but hazardous waste generation. You know that the LEDs are replacing fluorescent lamps. Fluorescent lamps contain mercury as well, and that means that at the end of life, these lamps have to be recovered and treated and disposed properly because of the mercury content. So in this transition to LEDs and in the context of sustainable economy, we're also talking about reducing a source of mercury releases and reducing a source of mercury waste as well because of the longer time frame. And I think that's also a benefit in communities that live off grid as well. When you don't need to replace your lamp that often, that means you can, of course, use the service longer and no need to worry about those changes.
Wow. You both have shared so much light on that connection between lighting, climate, lighting, and energy, which often isn't as well known. So, given that we understand now the benefits to transitioning to LED lighting, how would you say that the region, the CARICOM region specifically, can help support this accelerated transition to LED lighting? And let's go back to you, Anna.
Thank you, Asel. I think everyone has a role to play in the transition when we're talking about what different actors can do. stakeholders across the the different sectors can take action. And maybe let me start by governments and some of the actions that governments can take in order to promote and accelerate this transition to LEDs. Governments, of course, have in their hands policy tools that can implement in order to reduce the market of inefficient technologies like incandescents and promote the market of LEDs. For instance, those policy tools are energy efficiency policy, adopting minimum energy performance standards that will improve the efficiency of the products on the market and make sure that the least efficient products are not allowed to be sold or imported in the case of the CARICOM region. The other option is actually within the context of the Minamata Convention. I mentioned as well that fluorescent lamps contain mercury, and right now they are exempted in the Minamata Convention. But the African region has introduced an amendment that proposes to phase out fluorescents by 2025. And of course, phasing out fluorescents will also promote a transition to LEDs. And every party of the convention has an opportunity for that amendment in the next conference of the parties that is taking place next March in 2022. And I think this is a nice invitation for the countries in the CARICOM region to support that amendment as well. Because they are talking about how to accelerate the transition in the region. I think they are uniquely positioned to support it as well. A lot of the markets import the lamps, and that means that the transition is, instead of importing fluorescents, let's transition and move to importing LEDs only. And there's also concerns about what to do at the end of life with those fluorescents that contain mercury as well. And as I mentioned, a transition to LED can reduce those mercury releases and can also reduce the amount of waste. So I think it's an important consideration for countries in the region. But not only governments can take, I think, private sector actors, industry actors, citizens like us can also take action. And I think private sector can, of course, commit to purchasing only LEDs, and that will be very important, especially in places, schools, hospitals, offices, making a commitment to moving on purchasing only clean and efficient lighting like LEDs. And private citizens like us as well transition as soon as possible to LED technology when you have a lamp to replace at home or when you have a lamp to replace in your office or other places as well.
Certainly. So you mentioned three major groups of stakeholders: the government, you mentioned private industry, and then you also mentioned us as consumers. If I may ask a little bit more about the role of the government, you mentioned this idea of standards and the introduction of minimum energy performance standards. With the introduction of standards, the other aspect of that is enforcement. Either it's like a voluntary or that it's compulsory. Can you share, I guess, from your perspective, what are the best practices surrounding the implementation of standards for lighting?
Absolutely. And you're right, there are different policy options that governments can take, and that can be mandatory standards or voluntary standards. If we are talking about a transition and a goal to remove the least efficient products from the market, definitely a mandatory policy is going to be most effective. You can set standards that are going to set efficacy levels for the different technologies, and that is like a minimum efficiency value. We can call it like that. A technology neutral standard, that means every technology is allowed in the market as long as it complies with the standard. That is a very effective way of getting rid of the inefficient products, and I think in the case of lighting, setting an efficacy level can effectively get rid of incandescence and fluorescent lighting if a level is sufficiently high enough. In terms of compliance, I absolutely agree with you that in introducing a MAPS is not enough to make sure that the products on the market are complying with the standard. There has to be a compliance framework that monitors the market, that certifies that products entering the market have the efficacy requirement or other parameters or criteria that are required in the standard as well. That's something that countries will need to implement as well. But the CARICOM region has an important advantage, I would say. Considering a regional approach to standards, considering a regional approach to compliance can certainly make it easier for governments, because there is going to be a lot of cost savings when implementing the standards. And of course, it's going to be more interesting for industry and for suppliers as well, looks into a region that has a common set of standards as well. So I think those are important considerations for the region, having maybe a common set of standards and a common framework that it's going to make it easier to implement compliance at the national level.
Thank you for that. So, Ryan, recognizing our regional advantage, how would you suggest that we in the CARICOM region support the accelerated transition to LED lighting?
Well, I actually don't know what more to add on. Anna so eloquently stated what all we needed to do, and I'm in complete agreement that the greatest action that we can do as a CARICOM nation is the adoption of standards and labels, something that we have been working on with the Caribbean community, specifically through CrossQ. Um, and of course, in the advent of that, national territories will also have to allocate resources for the enforcement of these standards and labels. But sometimes enforcement is not enough because we do have old stock within countries that are themselves. And one of the programs that some governments can do is a bulb replacement program because we need to instill confidence within the consumer. And sometimes the consumer is a bit reluctant to go from their traditional lighting, which they know as either incandescent or fluorescent, to new technologies such as LEDs. They may say, well, I might not like the lighting, or I just don't trust the technology. So these types of replacement programs can also instill that good nature within the consumers, and of course, apart from lights lasting longer, but if they have any other lighting that they want to replace, they will then more unlikely transition to LEDs themselves.
Certainly. The role of consumer is integral to this transition to LED lighting, and building consumer confidence in the technology is important. So, thank you both for helping to raise consumer awareness by being part of this Illuminate lighting series, specifically focusing on lighting and climate, and lighting in the context of this idea from dependence to resilience, fueling our recovery with sustainable energy, which is our theme for CARICOM Energy Month 2021. Again, I really wish to thank you both for your time today and for your expertise. We truly enjoyed your conversation, and we know that everyone listening has learned a lot. So thank you both.
Thank you, Asil.
Thank you for
Looking
having me
forward for
on.
the next one. Keep me posted.
Will do. Thank you.